Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I am Carla Sainz, and I am the Regional Advisor on Bioethics of the Pan American Health Organization. Before we formally begin the session, I would like to go through a few housekeeping matters. This meeting will be held in Spanish. All right, so we will now continue in Spanish. It is a pleasure to have you with us during this webinar. This is the fifth of a series of webinars having to do with clinical trials. These webinars are co-organized by the Regional Bioethics Program, which is part of the Unit of Science and Knowledge in the Unit of Science and Knowledge for Impact and the Health Technologies Unit of PAHO, which are part of the Department of Innovation Access to Health and Medicines of the Pan American Health Organization. Today's topic is clinical trial registration and the International Clinical Trials Registry Platform, ICTRP, which is part of the WHO. I would like to point out that we are not going to do what we normally do during this session. We are not going to issue certificates to the participants. However, if you are registered, you can enroll in our ethics research list, and you can receive the recording of this session and also get information on the next webinar that we're going to host. We do invite you to also check the Regional Bioethics Program's website, where you can find the recordings of the previous webinars. So without further ado, I do have the pleasure of welcoming my colleague, Dr. Ludovic Reves, who is the Unit Chief of Science and Knowledge for Impact, which in turn is part of the Department of Evidence and Intelligence for Action in Health. Dr. Reves is going to tell us about the importance of having registration of clinical trials and the ICTRP platform. You have the floor, Dr. Reves. Thank you very much, Carla, for the invitation, and a very good morning to everyone. First, please confirm that you are here seeing my presentation. Yes, we are seeing it properly. Thank you. The idea for today is to talk about the International Clinical Trials Registry Platform, the ICTRP. Let's see if I can advance the slides. In principle, when you talk about platforms and registry, it might seem like a rather dry topic, because we know that this is aimed more at the technical aspects of a registry. For this reason, I would like to start with this question. How and why does this type of registry used? So I want to first root you in what is currently happening, and then where this initiative came from and what potential it has. Right now, excuse me, Ludovic, I'm not certain that the slide we're seeing is the one that you wanted to show. It just says questions. Yes, that's the right one. That's why I have that slide there. So those are the questions that might occur to you when you hear about this platform. So if any of you have a relative suffering from a given disease, a complicated illness for which there is very little treatment, and there may be low expectations of survival. And you might want to know what options my family has to explore potential new therapies and treatments. For example, an advanced cancer tumor, what therapies exist? Is there any clinical trial out there right now in the area where I live that the patient could participate in? So this is why these kinds of platforms exist. Or rather, I might say that my field is dengue, or my field is another disease or diabetes, and I want to know whether there is a clinical trial for this. And I want to know what other colleagues are doing now that might be similar to my own ideas, or perhaps I want to collaborate with those colleagues and identify them to see whether we could do a multidimensional study. So you can check the platform and see what is happening in that field right now in order to properly place my study. Or I'm on an ethics committee and we're looking at many clinical trials and also want to follow up to find out what has happened to these studies. Have they been published? And where are they right now? Sometimes studies may have been conducted years ago, and we want a new evaluation for the committee. And for that purpose, amongst the resources available is the registry of all these studies. And so we can learn how that study turned out. Or I'm doing a systematic review for decision makers of a new therapy, for example, as occurred with COVID. And I would like to identify all the studies that have been conducted to make sure that we have access to all of the evidence. And the registry allows me to identify them. So these are some of the uses of these registries. Those are some of the questions answered by clinical registry platforms. And there are also publications that we have that serve as a framework. Within that framework, we have three blocks of information. First, we have evidence. Now, so then we have a summary of the evidence for policy and a third block, which is looking at the evidence, and this is done in order to do prepare epidemiological decisions, procurement of medicines, and to incorporate various interventions. So there are different uses, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we have everything that is being done so we can identify these studies, review them, and this can lead to concrete action within the system. And that is the overall approach that we have. Now, what is a registry of clinical trials? It's a prospective and standardized registry of clinical trials based on publicly available data as a prerequisite for their authorization and implementation and ultimate publication. So this is a system that has several components. The most important is that it be done prospectively. In other words, a study is not registered afterwards, but from the planning stage. This is part of the protocol. And this is also standardized to make sure that the data will be the same for each case, and then it also has to be publicly available. This is the very essence of the initiative. And subsequently, the results have to be published, and we're going to talk in greater detail about this later. Now, I have the definition of clinical trials here, which I'm not going to read, but what I want to stress is that it's not limited to pharmacological products, but there are clinical trials over many different kinds of interventions, and these types of clinical trials seek we want them all to be registered and not only the ones that are trials of medicines. Why is it important to have such a registry? And I have been fortunate to been involved in the beginning of many of the discussions that led to the creation of these registries within the WHO. Theoretically, what we talked about back then was precisely that a significant percentage of studies being conducted are not published afterwards. And it's more or less half of the clinical trials that are started do not ultimately get published. And so there is a big publication bias towards positive ones. And so the ones that had negative results did not get published. And so whatever didn't work out was not published, and important information was lost this way. Another key issue that was identified was that in these studies, and this has been true over time, is that when a protocol incorporates some certain outcomes, but once the study is published, several of those outcomes are not published, and they only published the cases in which there were positive results. So again, a bias is introduced this way, and there are several studies that admitted things that were frequently occurring. So the idea here is to have greater transparency regarding what happens and what gets published. And we should not forget all of these, but it reduces the duplication of studies and can facilitate collaboration. And it improves or may improve the quality of studies, because if we see from the beginning that there is a certain study and it had some flaws, or I can see what has been done or is being done, then I'm going to help to strengthen the quality of those studies. Obviously, ethical standards as well, and there can be improvements to health this way. And this is what we have seen, for example, during the pandemic. This is a meta-analysis that was conducted and published in December of 2020. Before June 2020, patients that had acute respiratory illness due to COVID were not given corticosteroids because that increased mortality, and there were observational studies that included such biases as that the more complicated patients, more severe cases got the corticosteroids, and then they were more likely to die. So when we began to dig deeper in several of these studies, particularly under COVID, but other studies were coming out at that time very quickly. In less than 2 days, we had all of the countries recommending corticosteroids for those in the ICU, and many of those studies had not been published. And we saw the preliminary results, and we identified this for this meta-analysis, and we saw that they needed to have a registration of these clinical trials. So we saw almost live and direct a complete complete change in COVID treatment. By having these registries, we were able to do the meta-analysis, and this had an impact on health treatment and outcomes. Here, This is the minimum data set. When we talk about the standardization of data and a registry, these are the 24 minimal fields that each registry for each country that should have, and they may have additional ones depending on the context in the country. I wish to clarify something though. The WHO is a meta registry. In and of itself, this does not collect data and you can't go into the WHO registries to get details. What WHO does is to generate some standards for national and regional registries. And each of those registries incorporates information from the protocols, and they are standardized across these 24 fields. And you can have more fields than 24. And this serves to help us identify when there are duplications, and it reorganizes all of the information on the WHO platform. So that is the model that currently exists. And for this reason, the WHO assesses a set of primary registries or registries that provide data and evaluates them according to certain criteria of content, quality, validity, access, technical capacity, administrative profile. As you know, when you allow users to upload information, it is very important to verify the quality of that information and to know that the data is real. And so some minimal work has to be done to try to ensure a certain level of quality. Obviously, it's with so much information and such a tremendous volume of data from each study to have it perfect, but insofar as possible, we try to make sure there's no missing data and do so through a quality process. So with these primary registries, those are the ones that on a global scale compile the information in order to subsequently upload it into the WHO system. Here, we want to very quickly go through some transparency milestones. This is what happened in the United States when they began to have some regulation under clinicaltrial.gov, which was the first registry that used these standards. And later there was an entire initiative in which different groups and standards came out and new registries came up. So this has been a very long journey, as you can see, in order to get where we are today. And one of the key elements, for example, has been the Helsinki Declaration, amongst others. And I want to highlight that Helsinki says that every research study should be registered formally, although this has been for clinical trials, and general research has different challenges, but we have to look at what the study does, what its purpose is, and once it's concluded, it has to be published. As we said before, half of clinical trials were not published subsequently, and they might only be published 3 to 10 years after the study concluded. So Helsinki and the WHO have an initiative to ensure that it gets published at least by the WHO. Once the study concludes, that the data be published either in a journal or in the same platform that exists, and that we get some crude data on the main findings. And so this is what has been implemented. Here, this is a summary of what we've had thus far. At present, there are 20 registries providing data in our region. This is from Brazil, Cuba, Peru, and the United States. But there are 20 in total from throughout the world. Some are regional, some are national, but this is for clinicaltrials.gov, and they accept registries from any country in the world. So I've been in Honduras or in Panama, I might have my own registry, but I can also have access to another registry that will be on the platform of the WHO. But we are also working with some countries to strengthen their incorporation into the platform. One example is Panama. We're trying to make sure that they comply with all of these requirements in all of these fields. At this point in time, the platform has more than 1 million registers from throughout the world. This shows you the distribution of the studies that exist in each of the regions and the number of registers. So this is a slide that we have with last year's data, and this gives you an idea of the number of studies being conducted in the region of the Americas. It's 222,356 for last year. That's clinical trials in the region of the Americas. Many of them, although they are in clinicaltrials.gov, they come from each of the countries of the region that have either registered clinical trials or in the registries of Cuba, Peru, or Brazil. So that's data that's available at this point in time. When you go into the platform, you can do a search, a basic search, and this is a more advanced search. In advanced search, you will find the fields. The registry allows you to look for all of the trials or just the trials that are currently recruiting patients. So trials that are in underway right now, you can look at it by stage, by country, by topic. The platform is quite complete and includes quite a bit of information, but the search engine still has some challenges and has room for improvement. It has a lot of information that could be put to better use if we figure out ways to improve that search engine. And later we're going to talk about some developments to address the challenges we currently face. When you do a search here, for example, you will find that sometimes a study, if I'm looking for something in Peru, that same study might exist in Argentina or Singapore or in France or also in the United States. And in each country, it has been registered in a different database. So we have to, another thing that the WHO platform tries to do is to identify when the same study has been registered in different places. And this allows us to link together more than 120,000 registers. I'm not saying it's duplications, but it's important to have information from each registry in each country, but it tells the user that this register is in different registries. And so that way we don't duplicate information, but rather are certain that what we're looking for is all the same study and not different studies. Also here, you can look according to stages of the study. You can search according to how I find the information. If I say something about diabetes, we can say there are so many studies on diabetes, and we can see this along a certain line. You might say it by 20 or 100. For example, if I select this, it shows me the information. And you can understand where it's being done, what its public title, what is its scientific title, who's conducting it, who's financing it, and what are the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria, what have the developments been, and what kinds of studies are being conducted, if it's updated, etc. Or you can have access to a lot of specific information on a given study. These are some of the additional fields. This is an analysis of the data that we had. This is a WHO platform that has more than 1 million hits over the last 3 months. And we can see that this is from all countries. This gives you an idea of the magnitude of the studies recorded or registered every year. But you can also see that this has been increasing significantly over the years, and we keep registering more and more clinical studies as well as more studies within the region of the Americas. This bar graph shows you the number of clinical trials that have been registered. We see that this has been growing, and at the bottom, there's a new search from 2023 for 7 countries, and the type of information that you can extract from this database. Most of the studies are phase 2 or phase 3. Also, out of more than 2,000 studies, we know what stage they're in, but more than half of these studies, we don't know what stage it's in because the person who uploaded the information did not include the stage. So there is some very valuable information for some cases, but in others, important data is missing. So we're working at improving the information that is included by the countries and by whoever is doing the registry for a country, and also to make sure that the data is structured so that it can be more accessible.
These are some of the final considerations. All of the clinical trials must be registered before the trial begins. All the trials must report the results. And as I said earlier, this started with the initiative of registering the trials before starting the protocols. But now you can see there is a percentage of the studies which researchers have put on a dashboard placing the results of clinical trials, even though they may have not been published in an article. These are raw data that we have that you can easily identify. So obviously, WHO is promoting this, and many of the registries have already incorporated a lot of this. So this is very important, really, because if I'm doing a mega analysis of some regional area of a specific area, whether medications or new medications, then I can create or have access to what has been published and is already available, and also to the main results and outcomes. Once I have that, I can make easier decisions, but it might take 10 years, where it might take 10 years to be published, but it allows me to have quick access to the registry. Something else that some countries have opted to have primary registries. PAHO and WHO encourages each country to have their own registry, but in some cases there are some countries that, depending on the size of the trial, perhaps they may decide that according to their regulations, they may have to register that in another registry that might be part of the WHO. So there might be other registries available where there is also public information available. So what we're trying to see is to avoid that duplication and to consolidate all that. Something that we also seek, it's to adherence by the different ethics committees, biomedical reviews, and also different institutions and organizations. So this will be encouraged or mandatory to a certain extent, so that data that is being requested can be registered, and sometimes also by adding additional data, and also to publish or to reference publication of that by providing the link or the source of that where that is being published within 12 months in accordance to the regulation. In the Americas, they're already incorporating this somehow. And obviously, the PAHO and WHO provides a technical cooperation in order to implement that initiative of registration, whether the development of registries, as this time it's happening in many countries. So they already have it. So the idea is to strengthen them in accordance to the regulations that they have for their clinical trials. And with this, I would end my presentation here, and I will be available for any specific questions that you may have. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ludovic. Before opening up the floor for the next presenter, I would like to underline some aspects that you have mentioned in relation to the ethics concerning the registration of clinical trials. Why is it so important from the ethical point of view to register clinical trials for medications and medical devices? I want to make sure that you can view the screen here. Let me know, please, if you can see the screen. Carla, we can see it well, even though it's not in presentation mode. Okay, fine. I simply want to underline the ethical importance of the registration of clinical trials to know what research is underway at present time or has already been conducted. That can be crucial to know whether a study can be ethically acceptable or not. A study, in order to be ethical acceptable, it needs to have social value. It needs to have the possibility of contributing to the betterment and improvement of health and well-being of people. If that study has already been done, then the new study that is underway would not have any added value to that, assuming that it's identical to the one that's already conducted. Furthermore, as you know, that in order to evaluate whether a research is ethically acceptable or not, we have to make sure that that research or study has a favorable balance, cost-effective, and risk-benefit. A study always has risks, but if the social value of it is not there because that study has already been conducted and we're not aware of it, then we would have a situation where we only have risks and no perspective or potential benefits. And even though, considering that we have a trial that has been repeated many times, then we will be multiplying the risks, because every time that the trial is conducted, it will be, instead of increasing the benefits. So this is an overall global perspective that many times we can see not only the benefits, but also the risks. Even some of those trials that could have been ethical, acceptable because they had more benefits than risks, but because of the benefits and we increase the risks, then it's not worth it. In that case, for that investigation, that research would not be ethically acceptable. Also, it should be noted and underlined that in virtue of this, one of the indicators of the systems of the ethical issues for WHO studies is the fact that countries should have the requirement of an ethical perspective research in accordance with the WHO standards. As our colleague just said, the prospective registry of prospective studies, and in accordance with the WHO standards, is not limited to pharmaceutical clinical trials. It is not limited to clinical trials that are seeking the authorization or endorsement of a pharmaceutical product, or that could be endorsed by the National Registry. We are talking about registration for all clinical trials. According to the WHO definition, it's an issue about the design, and also the requirement is that, in other words, the requirement is to have registration of all the clinical trials that fit that definition within the intention or the target population and the intended use for the intended population. Here, I would like to underline, as you may recall, that the guidance and the idea of catalyzing ethical research in emergencies of PAHO, we underline the importance of transparency and the trust in the investigation and research, and the role of the registry of clinical trials, so people will know what kind of research is being done, not only because it's a central issue of ethical governance of research and investigation, but because it provides transparency, not only the research that is being done, for instance, in a single jurisdiction that will generate real trust in the research. And that trust is important to go further, because without trust, first you want to involve people. You want to have trust in the people. If you don't have trust from the people, there will not be participation in the trials, and then you will not achieve good results. But it's not only the trust in the research, and this was a very hard lesson learned from COVID, but has an impact beyond COVID, that without trust in research, you will hardly have confidence in the results of your research. So to register your research in a prospective manner not only will have an impact on your research per se, but also for public health in the long run. Finally, to register research and investigation is fundamental in order to in order to have more collaboration, your investigation, because if you know there is an investigation underway, you know who's been involved in it, and you can network with other people, with partners or people who can collaborate in similar research or trials. So in that regard, I am just sharing a recent publication by many of us here as to why advancing collaborative research is justified, and how you have access to this publication and it's available to you all. Now, however, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Tiago Hernandez Rocha. Our colleague, Tiago Hernandez Rocha, will be talking about projects that are underway that have the potential to maximize the impact of the registration of clinical trials beyond of what we have been talking here, and also make it possible to allow for the new use of this tool by the WHO. And Tiago Hernandez Rocha is the regional advisor for data science, and he also works in a department for health analysis and equity metrics for health and action in health from the metrics and health analysis division. He has been working on natural language processing, geographical intelligence, data analysis by region, and also the impact on health. He has many years of experience developing projects, multi-centric studies, and you will see the value of his experience in order to take the great advantage of the greatest of the clinical or registration of clinical trials. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your introduction and for the invitation to be here with you and to share a bit the experience about tools that may be useful to generate evidence and whatever the tools that are available in the database. So greetings again, and thank you for the invitation. And let me see if I can share my screen here now. We can see it. Very well, colleagues. My presentation is a bit about how artificial intelligence tools can be used with the ICTRP to make it possible to have something available for the processing right away. As our colleague said, there is a lot of information in the database and a lot of information that is available in different fields and texts, but that are not structured. For instance, inclusion criteria, the type of interventions, characteristics of the population that are accepted to be part of the study, and there are many others. So how can we utilize today tools that are available, such as the use of AI and the study of natural language to extract data, and thus to be able to have new possibilities from the point of view of gathering new evidence in order to support not only the patients, researchers, and the health authorities and ethics authorities, and to show results of what's happening in terms of clinical trials and what's going on with them. Before I go into the presentation, I would like very briefly here to mention some of the different things that we can do with AI tools. The 6 options that we have here and the whole set of this that we have has large groups or areas where AI tools can be used in order to manage data that is already available through simulation, also the outreach impact studies. Everything today, everything that has to do related to generative artificial intelligence, which is large language models that allows us to reproduce audio and video by including general information. So there is a set of activities that are already under in the concept of non-generative AI, which is already to save or use structured data and follow those standards to draw images, to be able to identify and extract data that is available in audio and from different sources where there will not be duplication, but at least we'll be able to identify the set of information that is already available in the database. And perhaps here there is rules and graphs in order to identify, for instance, threats, cybersecurity threats, cyber attacks, or standards. For instance, the generative AI could be, for instance, that you may track your data to see if there is a threat of a tracking. So this set of information is also based on AI tools, and also not only securing the information through not only data and images, but also the purpose is the optimization, how to improve the relationship and of the different inputs to achieve better results. So all of these domains, 6 domains, have the advantage that can be used through these AI tools. And under these 7 domains, we have many things. We hear about all the self-driving vehicles, by also AI tools, a combination of tools. For instance, we have the capacity to do classification or to detect anomaly detection. We also possibilities are endless. And a lot of what we'll be covering today is in relation to how we can use these tools, and it has to do with the recognition and generation of content, especially language models and knowledge discovery. So the different groups that are presented here have specific applications. In other words, the different broad language models are not perfect to meet every type of challenge. So you need to have different possibilities. So the different tools of AI tools, which are very good to generate content, such as chatbots and other development of content. So we have developed some tools that will be presenting you. So for the other groups, we have different possibilities for application. So there isn't a single thing that is perfect to be applied to everything. The best solution for one problem, it will have very specific to the problem. So I like the fact that, for instance, that we can understand the AI tool, that we can see them not on an end of itself, but by more like a means. It's not the solution to all. The best tool is the adequate tool, very suitable to your problem. So here it's important to keep in mind that there are different type of tools that are appropriate depending on the type of problem. There is a single overarching tool that will apply to everything. The most important thing in order to achieve AI-based artificial intelligence, in order to develop insight and content and to contribute to your result, you have to start at the basis of a question. Experts in technical knowledge of the different areas know a problem very well. They know what the limitations are, the challenges, the opportunities are, and if they're able to pose a question that is adequate in order to properly identify the problem that you have, to back it up with the data that you need to have, and the outcome and result you like to obtain, that will be able to identify the tool that you need. But if you don't pose the proper question, you will not gonna have the right outcome. Well, then you need to, for instance, you need to take into account the reality of a country and the specific knowledge of a given field, so you will have the ability to pose the right question. And on the basis of that, then you can start out, that would lead you to the development of the development of the tool. And according to that, you'll be able to identify your problem, what's the result you are seeking to obtain. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. And as I said earlier, there is a lot of information in the data, in the database that is not structured, that could use that type of a generative analysis tools in order to generate knowledge. And this is what I'm going to be showing you next. So the main set of technology that is available for this is the very large language model. Everybody knows the ChatGPT, but there are more than 150 models, and every day the number increases. Why are they called natural language processing models? They're broad and large because they are used by training a large data set that are available, so that information is collected online. It is collected in such a way that the AI model can analyze it and classify it, and that's used as a basis in order to analyze the models that we already know. It has a large number of parameters. Sometimes we hear things like there are about 400 billion point of data, or so those were the data points that were used for the training purposes in order to be able to identify standards and generate an adequate response, keeping in mind the data or the entry point that was used for that development. It has a general purpose, which is based on the natural language that we use. A commonality of human languages could be images many times. Also has a limitation as to the resource restriction, the resources, because internet is very broad. There isn't any model nowadays that is capable to capture everything. So whatever content is available on the internet, for instance, we have language and different things for publishing in different countries. So it does have some limitations from that point of view, from resource point of view, or the data, which are not perfect. It has to be monitored because no data set is perfect. It has to be monitored because it can generate any content that makes no sense from a technical point of view. So you have to, and they have to retrained and fine-tuned. So all of the models many times, through the training phase, they will detect their models and they are designed that, with the special content of some with medical training or medical content, or they will keep, for instance, biological markers for the clinical trials. There are other models that are being trained to extract image based data, or there's some other trials according to specific thematic areas. What we have here are the different applications that, according to the broad or large language model, can use. For instance, translation, smart assistance, document analysis, online searches, predictive text generation, automatic summarization, social media monitoring, chatbots, sentiment analysis, and email filtering. For instance, possibility to have filters that you can run through all of this. There are many of those. Now, how was this used in the database? Before we start think about that, I'd like to show you something else here. Very small graphic, and that I hope that you can see that. How does this work? This is a large language model. This is based on deep neural network. Just to give you an idea, there is a tool here that can be used and you can play with it because it shows you simulation of how it works. Let us say you have a person, you can visualize your data, you can empower the users to visualize, and then you need to have a keyword for how to do it. So you take all of this here, you would convert all of that into a template based on an algorithm that was developed according to the Google proposal by researchers that is called DeepMinds from the Google research that is used as a basis to train this model. So that turns interface into a medical template or matrix. Why? Because computers contain numbers. So once you turn that phrase into a series of numbers, the computer is able to interact with that matrix or template in order to identify and generate different possibilities of which one should be the word that would follow in that sentence. So once you have the matrix, you will do your critical analysis, and you will go to create the probability analysis. Once a person has the data that was used or information used to do the training, how the phrase was used, how the phrase was drafted, how, and then so maybe you need to go to the next phase to know the word. The word could be visualize or create. So here it would lead you to probability that will lead you to the next sentence that will complete the content of that sentence. This is the way it would work, or the flow of that information. So when you pose the question, they're able to collect and concentrate things, keeping in mind the data that was used for the training purposes and all the processing of the matrices in order to develop probability, in order to come up with the next sentence that should come up and to give you the answer on the screen and so forth. And then you can continue working on Outlook and very powerful computers. So you can do that live, but also is just to give you an idea that then with this fashion, you have already generated very interesting tools, such as this one that I'm talking about. One of the solutions that we use using this type of technology is a tool called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. I'm not trying to say it in Spanish. Basically, it's one of the challenges that we have is a powerful version. Sometimes there might be an error in probability. Just think about it, visualizing data and empowering the user to visualize something and they don't understand. So that will be, it wouldn't make any sense. So it could, if it's an error in probability, it will lead you to something that makes no sense. So for instance, if you ask a question, where would you like to go? Where would you like to visit? So if there is a wrong question, then whether it will lead you this way or another one, then it might be a nice, it might be something nice. But if you're talking about scientific evidence and a suggestion for professionals, when we're talking about something that is affecting the lives of people, this cannot happen, because if there is a mistake, the consequences can be very serious. So how can we improve? So what the generational models produce contents to diminish the amount of errors, so we can have trustworthy, reliable data, and it will make it possible for the content to be presented is accurate and endorsed and backed up by scientific evidence that has been validated, double-checked, and is correct. And for this, we need all these applications that are RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG. How does it work? The RAG application works together with the natural language model on the one side, on the other side with the database model. In other words, when you put together this, the user has a question, poses a question. The question will go in turn and develop an inquiry that will send you to the database. To that inquiry that was taken from the trial base, in other words, from a base that contained all the information, but not only will not only will take into account the data that was used for the training, but also when it was done and when you, for instance, under the model, language model, yes, they did use data for the trial and for clinical trials. But if they didn't do it, then you cannot be certain that the model will give you the right answer. So you need to start out with the database, with the clinical data, and with the evidence-based data. The user is asking you a question. It's going to lead you to the database, and then it's going to generate an inquiry by giving the information. Do not use the data for the trial, but only the data that's already in that database. And with this, you will be able to achieve the result of the consultation, and based on the results of the inquiry or the retrieval of information, you'll be able to generate an answer. So remember, at this stage, you don't know for sure what kind of, maybe it was across information, but what is important to have the information that has been evaluated, that has been already backed up by scientific data and the ethical committee, and it has gone through all the quality filters to develop content.
This greatly improves the quality of the output and the designation. So what did we do? We did precisely that. I prepared a video here because sometimes the internet doesn't work so well, but let me see if I can put on the video. This is a prototype. It's a work in progress, but I just want to show to you. We did a sample of the registries on the platform. Let's see if I can get this to work. All right. So we have the registers on the platform, and here we have the information, the trial, the date, the basic information that Ludovic was telling you about. But there's also other information, for example, information in unstructured fields. Let me show. For example, study design. For some people, it's fine. It has the allocation, the intervention model. But there are a million of registers in this database. It's been around for over 20 years. So not all of them follow this standard, but this is very relevant information because the study design is information which scientifically tells us about the quality of that study, or the evidence that was produced is strong because the study is randomized and robust. Another criteria that is very relevant that has unstructured information is that inclusion criteria. Who participated in this trial? Age, geographical region, gender, or other conditions. This field is not structured. If you had unstructured information, it's very difficult to extract information, to do tables and graphs and cross-check information. For example, one question in the chat, does this only have information on pharmaceutical trials? No, they're intervention trials. What are the interventions? Where are they applied? Who are the participants? So all of this is information that you can get out of the database. So there are many fields here that I'm not going to cover, and here you have the information. So when this gets included with the large language model, then we can say we have some suggestions that are here, and you might say, please generate something for me. Generate for me the number of trials by year, bearing in mind these variables and everything, and that's a prompt suggestion. And so you might request whatever you want from the natural language model, but there are rules about how you can extract information. They are not perfect. There is one thing which is called the thinking chain. If you have a complex task, it is better to break it down into intermediate steps and that the model can go through this step by step. What do we do here? Complex task. We put in a prompt. We go to the database. If a paragraph with a certain characteristics, I went 1999 to 2022, use the registration date and adjust these by countries and calculate the number of trials per country. Each line in the graph should represent a different country. On the X axis, I put the countries, and on the Y-axis, the number of trials. So the model took our question and converted it into language that the machine can understand, went to the database, extracted the information, took that information, and generated the content that I wanted, which was the graph. And the structure of the prompts are here to help the user and make it feasible for you. Don't have to read all of the documents, no matter how much I might want to interact with the model, but I could do this here, and then the graph of a different thing might come out. Also, for example, I'd like a table, participants in trials by condition. Then it could evaluate in the sampling that we then looked at. It's just a certain number of observation and the number of trials on diabetes, on HIV, on breast cancer, asthma, etc. And to make this feasible, and sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Let me test it here with another graph. I'm going to go back to the presentation because I see that my connection is a little bit slow, but the idea of the model is precisely that. And we don't have a video here. The idea of the model is that we can integrate elements of artificial intelligence in the data with the database of the trial, and that makes it possible to see what's available in terms of technology so that the model can extract information from the database and generate content, graphs, tables, text. And the model makes it possible for us to evaluate what code was used for this thing, because if you like to evaluate, for example, the quality of what is being produced in this session, we could go, I could go to the plan B. We can see what code the model used to generate the graph so that you can check whether the variables are correct and whether the information available that was used for the model was appropriate. And there's a lot more that can be done. For example, there are systems that are based on artificial intelligence agents is very new. And for example, it may have the capacity to create new variables live. For example, we could go into the inclusion criteria variable and look at this and evaluate patients that have X or Y condition. The system might go to that variable, analyze the content, generate a new variables, and you can cross-check, for example, medicines trials that are implemented throughout the world. What countries are they concentrated in? What are the medicines that are being investigated for issues such as diabetes or for improvements in chronic diseases or other things? So our colleague Ludovic was talking about COVID. So this could greatly accelerate the process of discovering new treatments with information that is available today, but which cannot be easily processed without using a resource such as this one. So thank you very much. That's what I had planned to show you today, and excuse me if I went over time. Thank you very much, Tiago. I would now like to invite both Ludovic and our colleague, Sarah Caracedo, from the Regional Bioethics Program of the Pan American Health Organization to turn on their cameras. She's going to moderate this Q&A session, this dialogue. And I'd also like to remind people to post any questions you may have in the Q&A box. You can find the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You have the floor, Sarah. Thank you very much, Carla. And I also would like to thank Ludovic and Tiago for their presentations. There are several questions in the chat already and in the Q&A section. And perhaps it would be good to start with the most general one. which has been mentioned, but perhaps deserves a repetition. We're talking about the scope of the ICTP. What clinical trials need to be registered, unlike clinical trials that register a case, that other ones. I think it bears repetition that why is this not a registry itself? The ICTP is not a registry itself, but rather a platform that houses several registries. Perhaps Ludovic, you would like to start? Yes, I think maybe I could start and then Carla could add to this. I think that you summarize this essentially. The WHO platform, ICTRP, is not a registry itself. And sometimes we get emails saying, where can I register my clinical trial on the WHO platform? No, all that this platform does is to collect data from other registries, which are called the primary registries or registries that contribute data to WHO. At present, there are 20 registries that contribute data to the WHO globally, and they comply with all of the requirements. There are some associated registries, some national registries, but essentially this is a network. As we said before, there are other registries that are being applied to become primary registries as well that can contribute to the WHO platform. So this is what I have to say about the registries with protocols for clinical trials. And also there may be a question about the results of studies. This is something that we alluded to initially. We've worked on reporting in the operational aspect of clinical trials, and they have a regulation that can be easily consulted on the internet, and we'll provide the link. And there you will find the details of which clinical trials that have been funded with public funds and where you have to record the results. This includes phase 1. However, this is a topic that bears closer scrutiny because the ones that are, this is just ones with government funds in the United States. Now, as regards registration of the protocols at the beginning, we do see both under regulatory aspects in different countries that this either encompasses all clinical trials or those which Carla alluded to that might be more geared towards medicines, vaccines, and that kind of technology. But the WHO initiative includes all clinical trials without exception. Carla, I don't know whether you want to add to this. Yes, in fact, perhaps we should try to map out a little bit the various types of research and clinical trials that are conducted. Ethics committees review all research conducted on human subjects. Within all research on human subjects, there is a subset of clinical trials. As Ludovic properly defined it, those are studies in which you prospectively determine an intervention for a given group of people. This doesn't say what type of intervention it has to be. It could be pharmacological or not. It could be with a drug that's in the process of getting registered or something that's not. But within this subset of clinical trials, there is a smaller subset, which is clinical trials on medicines and medical devices. And then there's very relatively few of what is done in a country. As Ludovic said, the mandate of the WHO is to register all clinical trials under this broad definition. Now, all of the clinical trials are smaller than all the set of all studies done on human beings. But as Ludwig said, if you go to the Helsinki Declaration of 2013, and the new version is about to come out next week, and it reiterates this, a call is issued for ethical reasons to have registration of all research on human subjects. If you look at the publication catalyzing research, ethical research during emergencies by the WHO, that encourages us to register all research with human subjects. But we must bear in mind that we're talking about three different, very small subsets. And one is very small, that another one that more explicitly responds to what the WHO called for, and the other one, which is what we are trying to implement, another broader one. Another fact, if you do a search today in the ICTRP or other registries, you will not only find clinical trials, you will also find observational studies that are being registered, and that the WHO says that the focus of the ICTRP also is showing this, so they accept these and incorporate them. So at the beginning, you are going to see that there may be other options to select amongst clinical trials or observational studies. So there is some flexibility there, although the main focus is clinical trials within this platform, and the same is true of the countries. Thank you for those answers. Before we move on to take a deeper dive, I just wanted to ask two things. The first is, how often is the information in these primary registries updated, or the registries that provide data to the ICTRP? Perhaps Ludovic? Well, in reality, it depends on each registry. They are periodically updated. Some do it more frequently than others, but it's about every 2 weeks. They submit information. Some do it on a weekly basis. So it varies, but it is rather quick. And there can be a 2-week delay in some cases, but usually it does get updated on a continuous basis. And Carla, I also want to include, just to demonstrate what Ludwig is saying, I put in the link to the WHO so that you can see all of the registries that feed data into the ICTRP, and it shows you the date on which they've done their update. For example, the Australia, New Zealand registry was updated yesterday. That's the newest one, and the most out-of-date one is from August 19. But you can see exactly what date the data was imported into the ICRP. Thank you, Carla, for that information. All right. Many countries already have national research registries. Why does that not suffice? And why do we need the ICTRP? And generally, what do you believe are the main challenges to implement a registry that's part of the ICTRP? And what solutions to those challenges do you foresee? For example, if a country wants to make sure that the research conducted within its territory will get included in the ICTRP. Would you like to start, Carla, and I can complement it? No, please, you could start. All right. Several countries do have research registries or registries of clinical trials, but just those that fall under the regulatory agencies and not the whole set of clinical trials. There are some that do, but several of them do not have all of the standardized fields or criterion that we were showing you. And either they are not standardized the same ways, or all the fields are not in there. If we want to have comparable information that can be subject to a global search, it's very hard to do this if we don't have this standardized. The second point is that I could say that as a country, I might have my research incorporated, and I don't have, there aren't very many registries in our region that might say, well, I have a national registry that includes all of the research being conducted. It's true for some, but many countries do not have registries, or they have partial registries. But regionally or globally, if somebody wants to know what's happening in several countries or throughout the world, or multinational studies, you might have all of the information in one country. But, well, some might not be interested in the global information on the WHO platform. What we want to do is have a site where you can share all of this information to make sure that this studies are not being duplicated and that all of the essential information is there. What are some of the major problems we've had in developing the registries? And this is something that Brazil, Cuba, and Peru had to grapple with when they had their own registries, but had to update them to comply with not only the field requirements, but other aspects related to quality and security in order to be part of the ICTRP. So some additional work does have to be done, because often a country might have a registry which serves the purpose of generating a certain kind of information that might be useful globally, but they are also immersed in their own requirements of a regulatory agency within a given country. So sometimes there are processes and data that make it a little more difficult to compile the information in the exact way that we require it. So this will require modifications to the existing national registry. It might require changes to systems and processes, and it does take some time. So there are some countries that we have been working on this with over recent years. For example, the research registry in Argentina and in Panama, just to mention two specific cases. But what we have seen above all is that most of the efforts being made in the region are part of a subset, and they only include some of the clinical trials and do not compile all of the information. And when they do have it, it's not done in the standardized way as is requested by the WHO. So making these changes, this is what PAHO and WHO supports countries to do in order to strengthen the global initiative. And where it's been a little bit more difficult is in terms of recording the results. This is not necessarily part of national regulations and laws. And second, there's no platform on which one can record results data. This has to be built. And also, this is a process that's come about more recently, and we have to see exactly what should be reported, how it should be reported, and for it's getting more sound within this platform, and it's a good time for countries to incorporate, to get involved in that. Carla? Just to reiterate one thing that Ludovic mentioned, it is crucial that at least all of the clinical trials conducted in the world should be uploaded into the ICTRP. For many countries, including the trial in a registry that feeds into the ICTRP is just voluntary. It is important for this to become a requirement in all countries. Ludovic, that says that is a key point amongst the studies that we've done in recent years. We have found that there is a significant percentage, maybe 30 to 40% of studies that are published that were never registered in the region. And when we look more carefully at those studies, we see that they tend to be from academia or conducted with government funds, but that are just done in a single country or smaller studies, because sometimes industry comes in with standards that require a multinational registry in order to have publications and comply with regulations. So this is what we found generally, but there are always opportunities for general improvements. But we'd also like to stress the importance of registering all research, and for example, studies that have to do with changing behavior and surgical procedures. These are things that are not specific to medicines, and many other kinds of studies that are being left out, that are not included in registries or not being registered. And so our review, so we can identify publications and then we try to walk backwards and see whether they've been registered, or we see they're just seeing what happened with the ethics committees and what happened with these studies over time. So there are different ways, different approaches to identify these gaps. And more or less, we have found that this initiative over the past 20 years has captured far more studies, but still many are not. During COVID, it was very interesting because we had the opportunity to see it live and direct and to identify problems when they occurred. And the experience of COVID, it did give rise to an initiative to have more publications and make these studies more available globally. Thank you, Ludovic. I have a few questions for Tiago. The initiative that you have presented shows us the value of ICTRP, but there are some concerns that you answered in the chat, some concerns about this project and this initiative, but perhaps you could share with us what barriers you have encountered in this project, and also what opportunities you have identified to fulfill the potential of the ICTRP so it can reach more people, the public, and patients. So that's a question for Tiago. I thought Ludovic was going to speak. It's a question for Tiago. I'm speaking too much, says Ludovic. No problem, says Tiago, and thank you, Sarah. I think that one of the challenges that we have is precisely these fields in which the user is free to add in information. It is possible for the large language model to process that information and extract categories or structure data to do meta-analysis and cross-check of information. However, for us to be certain that this is being done properly, it is important for there to be rules and steps that are recommended as best practices in order to generate instructions whereby the model can process the information and give good output. But that becomes a nightmare because if the rules keep changing over the last 7 months, I can tell you that the way that we interact with the model changes about every 3 weeks. So it is very important to have it updated in order to be able to generate appropriate instructions, because this allows us to ensure that the information being processed is correct in terms of quality and how the model works. You can assess what's happening in terms of quality for 10 or 15,000 registers, but not with 1 million. So this stage of validation to generate prompts, and so that the chain of thoughts is appropriate, is a great challenge, but there are tools and a lot of development along those lines to allow us to overcome that obstacle. So that is one point. And also to work together to make it possible to extract the information would help greatly to make sure that the information available on the ICTRP will be much more easy to access. For example, if a patient is interested in a trial on a specific disease, as Ludovic said at the beginning of the webinar, they can find that information without having to go through so many filters and to have to really get into how the tool operates, so that if the person is not working with this every day, it might seem overly complex to them. So we want to make it more simple to just ask a question like you do on WhatsApp. And so we want to make sure that the tool properly answers your question about what is available, so that people don't have to can get the appropriate treatment. So I think that this type of technology can help spread very relevant information that's available from certain trials. And while more people become familiar with this platform, they can add value to it. National authorities and investigators can identify specific topics and keep the cross-checked information available. This will generate more support so that it's updated and that we include trials, as Ludovic and Carla were saying, that are not included on platform, but maybe they will, bearing in mind the impact that this information can have if it's available, easily accessible to everyone.
Thank you, Tiago. Ludovic, would you like to add something? Okay, perhaps another question in relation ICTRP in relation to the time that I must register before the ethical question, and the same questions in relation to the results of the research. At what point should those results be registered in the ICTRP or in the registry that is going to finally feed the ICTRP? Well, that depends on how the registry has been established in each country. From the ideal situation would be that once the ethics committee has already approved the latest version and it has already approved the protocol per se, that would be the best time to do it. Once you have that final version, that's when you send it to, of course, you send it to the ethical committee. The ethical committee may make any changes. However, at any given point, if the countries could have may consider before to register that before sending it to the or registering ICTPR, so to make sure that they have the latest and finalized version of the information before registering with the ICTRP. And the other thing is that these registries allow for amendments and changes that can be added as you go, as some changes come up, or as the status of the study or research changes, whether it has already been registered, it has already started, it's underway. So at any point, so it makes it possible to do and to add that along the way. I forgot the second part of the question, but perhaps Carla can answer, but if not, I can add it. Well, try to remember it yourself, because for the time being, I don't remember it. But I wanted to add something to the first thing that you said. And in fact, in the chat, I put the case of an article that together with Ludovic and other colleagues, we saw a few years is about the order. Because of the reasons that Ludovic explained, that whenever the ethics committee is approved, then once it's approved by the ethics committee, you have the final version, and then you know that it's already approved, and that's the final version. But that since you can have some disconnect or disconnected areas, we can see that this can happen. And we can see that in that article is that afterwards, at the time of registration, what the public title can be added, and that can be misleading for participants, because all of those people who are in the ethics committee who are so careful to review a process of informed consent, so they would not be forwarding deceitful information, saying things like, alleging things like, if you participate in this study, you're gonna obtain the cure. You have to make sure that, and that's what the publication came out about the fact that there was a trial that had been registered under the title Cure for Diabetes. That's why we made a call to look at all the flow in a more rigorous manner, in a more continuous manner. And in that article, we made reference to some policies of the FDA that is only for a subset of the clinical trials that are seeking authorization of a pharmaceutical product or a medical device. But I think that's a good lesson for all countries, that the entity or the regulatory body requires that you include the number of the registry, fda.org, in the document of your consent, informed consent, so that no individuals will be enrolled in a clinical trial without having done the registry beforehand. That's how we have been working, and that's another way to approach the problem. There is it's another area of development that has the capacity to export the information to the registry. It's like a banking account. You can send from a certain point, but then you need to have a primary registry to receive that information. But I believe that this is an area where there's a lot of potential in order taking advantage of the new technologies in order to see the way to integrate the different aspects of the process, even the ones mentioned by Ludovic in his presentation. For instance, the use of medical journals. We or journals should not be publishing any clinical trial that has not been properly and duly registered in an ICTRP registry, nor should they be publishing any research based on human beings that has not been previously approved. So, and this is in addition to all the potential that is out there of registering ICTPR, as Tiago has been sharing with us in his presentation. Yeah, I think I now remember the other part of the question, which had to do with report of the results and what is the timeline for that. Well, for WHO, there is a publication or a suggestion saying that there should be a period of 12 months during which, that after having completed the study, during that period, it should be 12 months, and then to have mechanisms, or to have a mechanism whereby that result may be published in the following weeks or months. But there is something else here. For instance, in the United States, as it happened before, every clinical trial during the 12 months, after 12 months, must be published. It can be published in a journal, medical journal, but not only in that medical journal, but also register in the database of that clinical trial, which will contain all the information. It would say results containing studies, and there you can go in to see all the tables, and that will provide the standardized tables and information, providing the different data of the participants in the trials, and also the different demographics, groups, and the main outcomes obtained for each one of the group, and specifically. So there is no statistical analysis per se, but it's basic raw data that it must be taken into account, and that can be used in the understanding that can be fine-tuned, but that's a standard form, and that you can go there to take that and follow that. So that really goes to what every country will define for themselves. But as I said, there is also the standardized form, as I mentioned And I also shared the link to that publication where you can see all of that information. Thank you, Ludovic. And perhaps in order to start um, bringing the discussion to a conclusion, and also to bring some other questions about the accreditation process, whether as a primary registration or providing the data to the ICTRP. Also, that we should underline that this is a voluntary, that the country should decide whether they want to share the primary registry, or they would need or according to the regulations, the country requires that they first register that in a national register before registering in the ICTRP. And also any additional information that could lead to another question is about the primary registry, for instance. I was working at the National Health Institute when Peru had the accreditation system. And there are many questions about that accreditation process by WHO. So it would be worthwhile to remember that in the case of Peru, for instance, it was in the case of IT tools that were developed and that were going to be registered, and that it was also done with the resources of the National Health Registry in order to have a proper, adequate structure that should have been evaluated at the time or before the WHO can accredit the ICTRP process. So how does the WHO cooperate with the countries? How can a country request technical cooperation from WHO for this matter? What are the formalities to be followed, in addition to some other questions that countries may have? Well, perhaps here, as far as technical cooperation, that depends on the PAHO offices in each one of the countries and the experts leading that area. So there should be a specific request that, and then there should be a coordination, and based on that, there should be a work plan developed together with the country. So there should be some mechanism that can be followed, some steps, whether they can require some changes, but because if it's a technical issues, then it can be done, or it should be done in collaboration with all the colleagues and all the people that are, or the IT people that should be working on it in any country. Also, there have been offers from countries such as Brazil at one point, where they have a platform that is open, that have made available to other countries, and that other countries may use in order to implement it. Or also, as I was saying, perhaps there's some other countries that don't want to have registries, but they may be registered in one of the registries that end up being registered with the WHO. So, but they can provide that information for that country because they already have that information in one of the registries in the country. And from there, they can generate, well, so not through a server, WHO server, you can develop a function so you can have a specific dedicated platform containing the registries from your countries or group of countries. And there you don't have to go out to look for it, but you will have direct access to it. So the different mechanisms to go about that. So if I think about it in a country, for instance, that has only very small size of clinical trials, there might be better alternatives than using the institutional or link, or they can go through their own registry, or they can even have a broader research registry before they can develop their own national registry. Also, that can be also linked and connected with the different regulatory and ethical processes of the countries, which not only require the developing the country, but and also to comply with the WHO requirements. That's why the timeline is important. You have to keep it in mind, give it a context and do it within the framework of what is required by the WHO, not only the requirements of your country, but in addition with meeting the requirements of WHO. Very good, perfect, thank you. Perhaps a few more questions so we can wind down now. The information that is registered in ICTRP, let us say, is that registered by the researchers themselves, or are there people who are responsible for each area of the research or the clinical trial area? The sponsor of the study, it may be the sponsor that each country will define or determine who will be doing that. But evidently, it is not the registry itself. In addition, if you want to register in the ICTRP, the requirements it has to be in English. Just to give you an example, in the case of Peru, they have it in Spanish. So what the person in charge of the primary research does is to verify that information is correct, that is properly reviewed, this quality information is reviewed, just as anything, so there will be no duplication or repetition, so the information will be accurate. That will be done, and that will be part of the quality assurance process. But whoever generates the information or enters the information is the sponsor or other collaborating partners, or in this case, the word sponsor is not necessarily the one financing, but rather we mean the institution that is in charge of conducting a study or the research study. Thank you. Thank you, Ludovic. And perhaps a final question, which is more about the concepts. What is the difference between ICTRP and the clinicaltrials.org? It's not the same thing, right? Clinicaltrials.gov.org is the registry for the United States. That's a primary, let's say, that's the first primary study that started in 1997. And that was the first study. And then there was another version in the year 2000. This one of the 20 that provide data to the ICTRP. So the ICTRP have 20 different registries sending data. One is the one on clinical trials, which has a lot of large number of entries, but is one of the registries now. Something that is important, WHO has 24 fields that in the end become more than 50 something. But if I'm talking about the minimum number of data that is included in the registry, but I can look at the examples of Brazil and Mexico. Perhaps I can see additional data that is not necessarily included in the registry, because each out of the 24 fields, those are the required fields, but based on that, after that, anybody can provide additional information. And then the WHO will not really be in charge of going about, they are a meta registry that will collect all the other registries in turn, like in the case of the US. But it makes it possible for other countries to register and enter their data. And that's what we find in that platform. We can find many countries that have registered, for instance, in Europe. But it also makes it possible for other countries to register their research, their outcomes. So in order to review all that information that is coming from all the countries that are going into that platform, that's the role of the WHO. And the role will be to make sure there's no duplication, and what has been registered in the countries that has not been duplicated, maybe it could be under a different title, or perhaps it's duplicated. So that would be the role of the ICTRP at the WHO level. We can't hear you, Carla. Sorry. I would like to link your response, Ludovic, to some of the questions that have come up about feasibility issues, about best practices, about costs and how do you do it. As Ludovic was saying, ICTRP is a meta registry that collects all the information and data from all the different registries, whether Cuban or other countries out in the region. So what we would need is for all the clinical trials that are reviewed in your country should appear and show in ICTRP. Which one is the way to reach ICTRP? That may vary. Simply, you may request the request can be that it can be registered in a subset of registry, that it could be registered in a registry in Australia or in Europe, but it must be registered in some place before it reaches ICTRP. Some countries have adapted or have opted for the option of having their own registry. And with the purpose of collaborating and to avoid duplication, we always stress that first there is an option that all the clinical trials are registered in the platform, and that if you're considering registering a clinical trial, it's important to make sure or to make sure that other countries are including all the information first in the national registry, not only in the national registry, but also another step could be like another country, like Canada, for instance, before it reaches WHO. So it does have a regional and then the global benefit, because any people from different countries, even in countries where they don't have a primary registry, it allows them to include the clinical trial there, and then finally it will reach ICTRP. Ludovic was saying how old that site was, clinicaltrials.org. And one of the things that I personally underline and stress about this site, clinicaltrials.org, is that constantly they are reviewing the subtitles, what they call each one of those fields, as Ludovic was talking about. So they'll be user-friendly and they will be easy to understand to the public at large. But that was just a few points that I wanted to add, and that it has to do with many of the comments and questions that have come up. And in fact, I can see somebody that says, if it's, okay, let me go back. If the registry of the clinical study is already done in the clinical, so you don't need to register in the ICTRP. No, first of all, it is not possible to go directly to the ICTRP. The ICTRP is a mega registry. You first have to go to a primary registry that will feed into the ICTRP. So clinicaltrials.org is one of them. If you don't have it, I can share it with you. I'm going to post it, put it in the chat, so you can see which are all the providers of data that feed into the ICTRP. And all those data providers include clinicaltrials.gov. In other words, if you don't have input your registry in any of those primary data or registries, it will not end up showing in the ICTRP. There is no way to go directly to register into the ICTRP. It must be registered into one of the other registries that will ultimately feed into the ICTRP. So a country would need not only to request the information that is required, which is the 24 fields, as Ludovic was talking about, but also to have an organized structure mechanism together coordinated with the WHO that would make it possible for your register will be able to finally feed the ICTRP. And you were explaining how the process works. Thank you. Thank you, Carla. I believe that we don't have any more questions. Perhaps it will be important to mention that ICTRP will give you a unique identification code. So if a clinical trial has been registered under different registries, when it comes to ICTPR, it will be coded under a single code. So they would know that that trial has been registered, that that's the same trial that has been already registered in different registries. And perhaps, Sarah, one more point. I see a question that I understand that perhaps it has to do with this and some of the lessons that we learned during the pandemic is that very often people were saying, no, we cannot register all the information regarding the clinical trial. It's not true that all the information is confidential. There is some information that should be made public, and that applies to all the clinical trials, including those that could be leading up to the development of a pharmaceutical or therapeutic intervention or pharmaceutical product. There are many studies on compliance with international standards, which show that the pharmaceutical industry tends to be better when it comes to complying with the registry criteria better than the academia or the other scientific areas or other research areas. So it's important to remember that beyond any discussion of confidentiality, there are some aspects of clinical studies that are not confidential, but instead should be made public to the public in general as a whole. I believe that with this, we are almost about running out of time, and then I will go to close the session now. Sarah, thank you so much for moderating the session, and Tiago, thank you so much for sharing the new developments. It's sort of us having a fan, and we open up it's like we have been talking about this for 15 years, but we're only looking at a small section. Now you're opening up the menu of options, which is very new and which highlights the importance of additional arguments. So all the countries should be required to register the clinical trials in a registry, primary registry that will ultimately feed the ICTRP. I believe Ludovic also has provided many reasons for that behind this. But in addition to that, he has also made clear the importance of collaborating, that we have to avoid duplication of efforts, and the importance of transparency, the trust and confidence in research and good governance of all research and all the information, that all that the research with the final goal, that all that information and the research will be available in a clear manner for all the region. Now we will leave you with some links to the regional program and bioethics. And I would simply like to close by saying that the next session will be, I believe it will be in November, because now this will be too close to one another. So it will be a scientific integrity, which is another area where we have a pending issue for the region and that we have to tackle. And also, we will be sending you the information in relation to that session, and also in particular regarding, well, not only the recording and also that information from coming out of it. I would like to reiterate that this series of webinars is a joint effort, is a shared effort between the regional program and bioethics and the unit on quality and regulation of health technologies of PAHO. So thank you very much. And now, for now, we will bid farewell, and we're just going to be sharing a slide where you can take a look and give you the links that we have mentioned. Goodbye, everyone.